So hopefully you were able to download Xcode without any problems. And if you went ahead and downloaded Xcode and opened it up, it may appear in your dock. So you may be able to open it up from here. Or you can also go to your Spotlight and type in Xcode and open it this way as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Xcode. And this first screen we see here is the ability to create a new project, as well as other open projects that I've used before. So if this is your first application, which is the one you'll be creating right now, this will probably be blank for you. But as you start creating some applications and using them, this will start to fill up with your recent applications. So you can go ahead and select Create a New Xcode Project. And for now, we're going to be choosing iOS application, single view application, but let's take a minute and talk about what some of these other options are. So below here we see OS X, and we actually have the ability to create OS X or the applications for the Mac operating system. We won't be doing that in this course, but this is an option, and it's actually also written in Objective-C. We also have access to a bunch of templates in iOS, including master detail, which you will see often when you want two views simultaneously. As an example, in the iPad email application, you see there's both a menu on the left as well as the current email on the right. OpenGL is super useful for creating games, and it's integrated, although we won't be covering that in this course. Page-based applications are really common for opening tutorials. Single view, which we'll be using, sets up some boilerplate code so we get an initial view or a place we can present information to the user on a single screen, and this will link up the code to create this single screen for us. So our project will get created with a single screen. Tabbed application is really common in many photo applications, including Instagram. Utility applications are less common, but as an example, you can go ahead and open up the Stocks application on your iPhone, and you'll see an example of what a utility application looks like. Empty application is just that, it's empty, and unlike the single view application that we'll be using, we won't immediately have a view controller, so nothing will be presented on the screen, whereas when we run our application with a single view application, we get a white screen because we haven't added anything to it yet. And SpriteKit is one of the newer templates, and this allows us to create games, and is definitely worth checking out if you're interested in games. Although we'll be sticking with the Cocoa Touch framework to make iPhone applications, not games. So we can go ahead and select Next after selecting Single View Application. And next we come to a screen where we need to choose some options to create our new project. And the first thing we need to do is create a product name. So I'm going to call this My First Application. And notice that I'm using camel case here, which is capitalizing the letters, the first letter for each word. And this is really common in Objective-C. In some other programming languages, you may have used underscores, but for Objective-C, it's very common to use this camel case. Next, you can put in an organization name. If you don't have one, you don't have to fill this in. It's not required. You see we don't get an error here. But if you have one, you can put it in here. For the company identifier, I've gone ahead and put a reverse DNS.myname here. But again, if you don't have your own URL, you can go ahead and just put self.edu.yourname. This is also valid. So I'm going to put this back in. And next we have a class prefix. And class prefixes are really useful later on when we're going to be creating files, so that it's very obvious to us that these are our created files and not something that someone else created or maybe Apple created. So it's really handy to put class prefix in. I'm doing CC for Code Coalition. If you, again, don't have your own organization, you could put your initials, so I could put EA if I wanted to. And if you use a different class prefix, just be aware that when you're looking at the code, anytime you see a CC, you're instead going to see your own class prefix that you entered when you're taking a look at your files. So don't be thrown. The names will look very similar, except it'll have a different class prefix in front of it. And in fact, some people find it helpful to use a different class prefix because it's obvious to them, like, oh, that's where this is being changed. We can also select a device here, and we can select between the iPad, iPhone, or a universal application. A universal application will deploy to both the iPad and iPhone simultaneously. To keep things a little bit simpler, we're going to go ahead and select iPhone for now, and we'll talk about the iPad later on in the course. So we can go ahead and press Next, and next we have the option where to save our project. So I'm going to go ahead and just save this right to my desktop, and you can feel free to press the source control button. We won't get to source control until section 3, where we'll be able to start pushing our projects up to GitHub, but it causes no problem to just initialize our project with a Git repository. So we can go ahead and press Create, and let me go ahead and expand my project out, and now we have our first XCode project. Great, so now we've been able to create our first XCode project, and let's take a minute. First, let's open up our XCode project so it fills up the whole screen. XCode has a lot going on that we can see here, so the more space we have, the easier it'll be to see everything that's going on. At first glance, there might be a ton of stuff here, and it might be a little intimidating and overwhelming, but in the end, this will actually be a huge advantage because Xcode in many ways acts as a one-stop shop where we can build code, add graphical elements, and even deploy to the App Store all from this one tool. So in the long run, familiarizing yourself with this tool will pay off huge dividends as you learn how to make iPhone applications. First, let's take an overview of what this environment we're looking at and try to demystify it a little bit. In this top left corner here, we have the Run area, where we can actually run a simulator of our application, and our simulator will mirror an iPhone or an iTouch, and we're going to be able to deploy and see what our application looks like right now. So go ahead and press the Run button, and when this thing loads up, we'll be able to see that it's going to be a blank screen, and this blank screen is going to be reflective of the fact that we chose single view application as our template, which meant that our application did not start with any initial elements on our view, but a view was in fact hooked up, and that's this white area here. We also can press the Stop button, which will start our application from running. And if we open up our simulator again, we'll be able to see that by moving to the left area over here, we get to see that we have photos, contacts, settings. In fact, if you were going to deploy your application to a foreign country or another language, you could press the General button, International, and change your language. So you could set your simulator to be in a different language to test that your functionality worked properly. Additionally, it's worth noting that the simulator can get buggy from time to time, so closing it out after you're done using it is a really handy tool to prevent issues. As we move to the right, in this top right area over here, the first area we're going to look at is the editor area. And the option we're going to look at today is called the Assistant Editor, which we'll be covering more in the next video. But for now, if you click it, we're going to be able to open up two screens side by side. And later on, what this is going to allow us to do is to open two files simultaneously. Let's go ahead and go back to the standard editor, which will show us this single view again. Incidentally, for those of you who are curious, this third option over here is for version editor. But we're not going to be touching on that today. In fact, if you try to open that up right now, unless you initialize your project with Git, it'll actually break because we don't have version control in our application right now. The next is our view toggle area. And in this left one here, we can open and close the navigator area, which is this left bar over here. We can also open the bottom area here, which by default is not open. And the left area is a debug area where we're going to be able to take a look at our objects in memory later on, for those of you who are familiar with objects. And this right area over here is where we're going to be able to print things out to our console. We're not going to be doing any of that today, so we can go ahead and close that area back up. The final area that we're going to be opening and closing is the utilities area, which is this right bar over here. Later on, when we have our view objects, we're going to be able to adjust the attributes of our view objects using this tab. For now, let's take a look at this left-hand area, the navigator area. We're not going to cover what all these different tabs do. I'll just quickly scroll through them so you can see that there are in fact a bunch of different tabs. For now though, we're going to leave this folder selected, which provides a graphical way to see all of the files currently added to our project. Some of you might not be able to see all of the files that I have selected because you haven't used the drop-down. So simply click this little toggle here and you'll be able to see all of the files inside of this group, supporting files, as well as all the frameworks that have gotten automatically included as part of our single view application. Next, let's take a look at this main area. We're not going to be adjusting anything in here today, but here we can use toggles like these buttons here for landscape left and right to choose whether or not our device or our application will be supporting landscape mode or not. In fact, it's becoming very popular for many applications to only support the portrait view. As you scroll down, you're going to see some launch images here. These are the images that pop up when your application first loads, as well as frameworks that have already gotten linked up. Let's open up the storyboard file from our navigator on the left here. And we can see now that there's this graphical interface which directly reflects what appeared on our simulator earlier when we ran it. In this lower right-hand area here, which is the main area on the screen that we haven't covered yet inside of XCode, is our libraries area. And right now we have the file template library, which will allow us to drag code in and have that appear inside of our view controllers. For now, we're actually going to select the third one from the left, which is our object library. And if we scroll up and down, we're going to be able to see that there's a bunch of different view objects that you might be familiar with. Things like a stepper, where you can increment by one or more. You might also see image views, right? We can replace and set our image views to make images or pictures appear inside of our application. Scroll up until you find the label, or scroll down depending on where you are in this list. Alternatively, you can also search for the label by going down to this bottom area here and typing in label. And drag and drop by holding down the label into your project. Make sure you move it towards the top. There's an instance where having it towards the middle, your label might not appear when you run the simulator. We'll talk in a later video about why that's occurring. But for now, just keep your label towards the top. And you can double click on the label and replace the text with Hello World. And we can go ahead and rerun our simulator by pressing this run button on the top left corner again. And our simulator will open and Hello World will appear.